Recording in progress. So, Boker Tov, we are on. Yesterday we began the third Perek. We got through the Mishnah, just about. Lengthy Mishnah at the beginning. Lengthy Mishnah at the beginning of the third Perek of Makkot, dealing with Makkot, surprisingly enough. That is our subject now. And we went through a list of various lavim, various mitzvot lo taseh, for which the penalty would be Makkot. Rashi and Tosfot both pointed out to us that this is not an exhaustive list. This is what's called Tana V'Shiur, where we taught some, but not all of them, because the exhaustive list would be very, very long. And this was just those whereby there is some sort of a chidush, right? Both Rashi and Tosfot agree that there is some sort of a chidush in each of the mitzvot listed in the Mishnah. They don't agree necessarily what the chidush is. Rashi went through trying to explain to us that many of these do not necessarily have an explicit azhara mentioned in the Torah, and that is why you might have thought that Makkot won't apply. But what Tosfot and Rashi do agree on, at least for some of these, is that these are mitzvot which are punishable by karet, and you would have thought that once there is already a chiyuv karet on a certain prohibition, there would not be a chiyuv Makkot as well. And what the Mishnah comes to teach is that even though certainly the first few and many of the other cases listed in the Mishnah of the Yisrei Arayot, Rabban Achoto, Achot Aviv, etc., those are punishable by karet. Nonetheless, they would be punishable possibly by Makkot as well. Now, as we know, and as we mentioned yesterday, in order for there to be such a punishment, there would need to be a hatra'ah, there would need to be warning, and there needs to be warning for that precise punishment. So in these cases, the only time, if it's a chiyuv karet, the only time there would be Makkot is if a person was given the warning, they were given the hatra'ah to say you're going to get Makkot for this. Okay, even though it should be it should be karet, but nonetheless. So what the Gemara started to say is that this is a machloket tanaim. It's actually a three-way machloket tanaim, whether you can have karet and Makkot for the same transgression or not. Meaning whether that can be theoretically possible and whether that can be practically possible. So that's where the Gemara begins, and we'll go through. We read the first couple of lines, but we'll read it again. Right. So the assumption is that the Mishnah says Elohein Elokin, and it refers to Chavei Kritot as well. It does not list any cases whereby there is mitat beitin. So says the Gemara, we're on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, right at the bottom, 2 lines from the end of the page. Says the Gemara, Chavei Kritot Katani. Right, so our Mishnah lists those transgressions which are chayavei kritot. Says Rashi over here, Rashi at the bottom. He says, "Kol chayavei kritot she'ein ben mitat beitin huzkaru b'mishnatenu le'inyan Makkot." Right, he says all of those prohibitions for which one would get karet but would not get mitat beitin. Those are listed in our Mishnah. Linyan Makkot, regarding getting Makkot. V'chad mikol chayavei mitot beitin lo uzkarba leokotim mitrubol Makkot. Right, and not even one of the chayavei mitot beitin is listed to get Makkot. And there Rashi adds in those last 4 words. He says im hitrubol Makkot. Right, that's the only case here where you would actually get Makkot before. So says the Gemara, chayavei kritot katani chayavei mitot beitin lo katani. So matnitin mani. So which Tana is it that holds like this? Who is the Tana who says that Chayavei Kritot could get Makkot, but Chayavei Mitot Beitin could not get Makkot? So says the Gemara, this is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Idatanya. We're going to introduce our Braita, which has got 3 opinions of the Tanaim. So opinion number 1 is as follows. After this Braita, the Gemara is then going to go through and understand what is the source and what is the machloket between the Tanaim for each of these positions. So the Tanya, Echad chayavei kritot, ve'echad chayavei mitot beitin, over the page now, yeshno bichlal Makkot arba'im divrei Rabbi Ishmael. So says Rabbi Ishmael, actually no, you could get Makkot for everything. Whether it's karet, whether it's mitat beitin, you could get Makkot for those things as well. So Rashi over here points out, he says, Yeshno, Rashi at the top of Amud Bet, Yeshno bichlal Makkot arba'im, hashtasal kadatach. Our assumption at this point, the way the Gemara presently understands is as follows. She'im hitrubo mita v'malkot lo kevamet. Right, so what happens if the person came and the person was given warning and was said, what you're about to do, you're about to be Mechalel Shabbos or whatever it is, he said, you should know that if you go ahead and you do this, you will get both Mita and Malkot, obviously Malkot first, right? So the assumption is there was Hatra'ah for both of those. And we understand at this point that Rabbi Ishmael is saying one would get both of those punishments, right? That's the question. When it says Yeshno Bichlal Malkot Arba'im, does it mean, there's two ways you could read it. Does it mean that theoretically there's a situation whereby one would get Malkot in place of Mitat Beitin? Or does it mean one would get Malkot and Mitat Beitin? At this point, the assumption is that one would get both. Okay, that's Rabbi Yishmael. Opinion number 2. Says the Braita, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Chayavei Kritot Yeshno Bichlal Malkot Arba'im. He says for those things which are Chayav Karet, that would be included for Malkot as well. She'im Asu Tshuva Beitin Shamala Mochalin Mehem. Because, I'll explain in a moment, but I'll just translate for now. Because if the person would do tshuva, so then Beit Din Shamala would forgive them. They could do tshuva and they would no longer be liable to correct. Chavei mitot Beit Din, however, eino bichlal malkot arba'im, shemasu tshuva and Beit Din Shamata mochalin lehem. Right, but Chavei mitot Beit Din, if one was there, one could not get malkot, because even if one would do tshuva, Beit Din could not forgive them. Beit Din does not have that authority. So again, says Rabbi Akiva, you're only going to get, seemingly you're only going to get one penalty, right? And the Gemara will explain why Rabbi Akiva says you can only get one and not two, because he says therefore for karet, it's possible that you won't actually get the karet. That is imposed, the penalty by the Beit Din Shamala. A person does tshuva, person will no longer get karet. They'll just get the malkot. Right, we know on Yom Kippur we say vidui, we say for all the things. If it's something which is Chavei mitot Beit Din, if it's something which is Chayav Karet, so a person did tshuva and didn't get that. If a person did something which is mitat Beit Din, and again, if the Beit Din has come and there's been a Gemar Din, so they're going to get mitah. That's it. The Beit Din does not have the jurisdiction to repeal that, to forgive them if they did tshuva, and therefore there would not be malkot. So Rashi says Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayavei Kritot. He says Im hitru bahem malkot. Right, they were given a warning. They were given hatra'ah that they're going to receive malkot. So then yeshno bichlal malkot v'lokin, and then we would say they would get malkot. Ve'en kan mishum chayvei shtei reshuyot. We're not saying that you are going to give them. They're going to be chayav for two different punishments. We're going to learn in a few lines. That's Rabbi Akiva's source. Because he says malkot im hakaret. We're not saying that you are therefore giving them both malkot and karet. Velama einan shtei reshiyot. Why not? Because a person could exempt themselves from karet by doing tshuva. However, when it comes to chayav mita b'dei Beit Din, so then there would not be malkot. Sheyesh kan shtei puraniyot malkot umita, because that would be two different punishments which are both imposed by the Beit Din, malkot and mita. Umishel keh, so for le'areg. And once the person, even if they received malkot, they would still be killed. She'afilu yaseh tshuva. Right, even if they do tshuva, Beit Din can't forgive them. There is a question here. There is an obvious question in Rabbi Akiva's Shita, which the Gemara will raise, which is, you're saying he can't be punished for two things. Well, he can't receive two punishments. So they can still get malkot, even though he's chayav karet, because he can do tshuva. But he hasn't done tshuva. Right, at the time when you give them the malkot, they are still chayav karet. So why, therefore, do you say that there is only one punishment and not two? The Gemara will address will address that question. It's interesting. It brings to mind as well, as you say, the concept that a person could do tshuva whenever they want. There's a Gemara in Kiddushin, which you may be familiar with, whereby the Gemara says, "What happens? We don't do this today, but what happens if a person does Kiddushin al Tanai?" And the Gemara goes through all sorts of conditions a person may make. A person gives a woman a ring and he says, "Harayat mekudeshet li al manat." I'm going to give you this ring on condition that I have 100,000 shekels, for example. So if he has 100,000 shekels, then it's mekudeshet. If he doesn't, it's not. And he can make whatever condition he wants. Again, we don't do this nowadays. Not a good idea for various reasons. What happens if a person gives a woman a ring and he says, "Harayat mekudeshet li," Almanat shani tzaddik. According to some Gersaot, tzaddik gamur. Person says, I will give you this ring. You're married to me on condition that I am a tzaddik, on condition that I am righteous. And so what is the din? Mekudeshet or lo mekudeshet? So most people say, now, what do you know? How do you know this person's really a tzaddik? Most people would say no. But the Gemara says, no, it's mekudeshet. Why? It says, even if he was a rasha gamur, even if he was completely wicked, still, that is mekudeshet, because shema hirhem tshuva bribo. He may have had a moment of tshuva, right? That's all it takes. Would that moment of tshuva, would that be enough for one to be exempt from the punishment of karet? So maybe here I think it may take a little bit more, but nonetheless, the Gemara says it's possible. There's an idea of hirur tshuva. A person can in just one moment go from being a rasha gamur to a tzaddik gamur, to the extent that it's going to be yoser neshet ish. So certainly that could happen for the punishment as well. But again, the question is, right now, if he hasn't done tshuva, and then he is receiving two punishments, why should that work? Nonetheless, that is what Rabbi Akiva says. So Rabbi Ishmael says that you could get karet malkot, for anything. You could get malkot for something which is chayav karet. You could get malkot for something which is chayav beitin. So that's Rabbi Ishmael. So clearly our Mishnah is not like the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, because our Mishnah excluded the cases of mitat beitin. That is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said, if it's something with mitat beitin, you cannot get malkot, because that is two punishments. But if it's something which is karet, you could theoretically get malkot, because a person could do tshuva and it would only be one punishment. So that, therefore, is the opinion of our Mishnah. There is, however, a third opinion. The third opinion in the Braita is Rabbi Yitzchak. And so we are now 6 lines down from the top of the page. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Chayavei kritot bichlal hayu, velama yatzat karet ba'achoto, laduno b'karet, velo b'malkot. So what is Rabbi Yitzchak saying? Rabbi Yitzchak is saying the following. In the psukim in the Torah, when you look at it, right, we said that the majority of these Chayavei karet, or many of them, are regarding which are listed here and which are also listed in the first Mishnah in Masechet Kritut, are regarding Isurei Arayot, regarding forbidden sexual relationships. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, when you look at those psukim, and you look and you see what it says Chayavei Kritot Bichlal Hayu, meaning we have a klal, we have a general principle telling us that they are Chayavei Kritot. Says Rashi, Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Rashi just about in line with where we're reading in the Gemara, he says, Af chayavei kritot shehitru bahen lemalkot einan bichlal malkot. He says Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion here is going to be, again, for Rabbi Ishmael says everything gets malkot. Rabbi Akiva says only karet gets malkot. Rabbi Yitzchak says no, only malkot gets malkot. Other punishments will not get. Why? He says even chayavei kritot, if a person was about to commit a sin, which one would be chayav karet for, and somebody saw him and somebody warned him and he said, I'm giving you hatra'ah that you're going to receive malkot for this. He says, Einan bichlal malkot. Nonetheless, he would not get malkot. Why? Continues Rashi. Lefi shekol chayavei kritot shel arayot bichlal hayu. Right? All of the chayavei kritot regarding the arayot in the pasuk were as part of a klal. They were in the general principle. As it says, Tichtiv, ki kol asher yaseh, Mikola to'avot ha'ele v'nichretu hanefashot, etc. Okay, says the pasuk, whenever it says v'nichretu, that's referring to karet, it's the same word, it's the same letters. He says the section begins, it says anybody who does from any of these to'avot, or from any of these actions, which are going to be forbidden, one would get karet. So that is the klal. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, chavei kritot b'klal hayu. Why does it then exclude? Why does it then mention separately karet regarding one's sister? Right? Says Rashi, lama yatsa karet be'achoto le'atzma dichtiv be'kedoshim tiyu ve'ish yikach et achoto. Right there, the pasuk says. Do we have the whole pasuk here? I think. Yeah, it's not here in the Gemara, but the entire pasuk is. I had it here for you. This is the pasuk in Vayikra Kaf, pasuk Yud Zayin. It says, "Ish asher yikach et achoto." If the person takes his sister, v'nichretu le'inei bnei Aman. So there it mentions again v'nichretu. There it mentions karet. So again, the problem is the Torah already said as a general introduction to this entire section, it said all of the Yisrei Arayot, one would get karet. It then mentions one of the specific Yisurim of one sister, and it says, for this, one would get karet. We already know that one gets karet. It's already told us. So this is one of the 13 principles Shatran and Dreshet Bahen. We say them every morning. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Shatran and Dreshet Bahen. One of them is, right, Kol Davar Shaya Bichlal V'Yatsa Min HaKlal Lamed. Any time where you have a certain particular instance, which was part of a broader category. So you have right, we have klal uprat klal, etc. So you have a prat and you have a klal. So this principle is as follows: you have a klal, you have a general broad category, and then any one case, any one matter which is taught separately from that category. So continues the bright of Rabbi Shmuel. It was excluded from that category, or was mentioned again outside of that category in order to teach us something. What do we say? We say lo lelamed al atzmo yatsa. It's not to teach only about itself. Obviously, it's to teach about itself as well. But it's ela lelamed al klal kulo yatsa. It was not mentioned separately only to teach about that particular case. It was mentioned separately to teach about all of the cases in the category. So we know that the general category of Yisrei Arayot, which are Chayavei Kritot, we're told already that they are Chayav Karet. Then we are told that one of those cases specifically is Chayav Karet. So why is that? Says Rabbi Yitzchak, this is not Lelamed al Atzmo Yatsa. It's not to teach you just about the case of Abal Achoto, but it's to teach you about all the cases in the category. All the cases in the category of Arayot, and more broadly, all the cases in the category that are Chayav Karet. Right? So again, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Chayavei Kritot Baklal Hayu, V'lama Yatsaat Karet Ba'achoto. And why does it then therefore bring the case of Abal Achoto to say Karet? Answers Rabbi Yitzchak, based on the bright of Rabbi Shmuel, right? Laduno B'Karet V'lo B'Malkot. To teach you that for this case, and in fact for all these cases, one would get karet, and one would only get karet, and one would not get malkut. So that is Rabbi Yitzchak's. That's how he learns. Says Rashi, Lama yatsa karet v'achoto le'atzma dichtiv v'akdoshim tiyu v'ish ki yikach v'achoto, etc. Right, that is the pasuk that we just saw. He says laduno b'karet lekach shina b'karet shelahen. That's just why I taught karet by it again. To teach you that you only have the penalty of karet and not any of the others, right? So those are our three opinions, and it goes in, I guess, in descending order. Rabbi Shmuel, who's the first one who says that you could theoretically get malkot for any negative transgression, whether it's chayav mitzvah beitin or whether it's chayav karet. Rabbi Akiva says no. You could only get malkot for something which is chayav karet, and Rabbi Yitzchak says no. You could only get malkot for something which is chayav malkot, not for something which is chayav karet. And therefore, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva. According to the first two opinions, according to all of them, but certainly according to the first two opinions, it means to say that you could only get malkot on those additional prohibitions if the hatra'ah was, I guess, mistakenly for malkot. But really, the penalty should be whatever else it is. So those are the three opinions. Gemara brings the Braita in order to teach us that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And now we're going to dissect one by one the opinions of the various Tanaim, understand why it is precisely that they paskin this way. Meaning, Rabbi Akiva gave us somewhat of an explanation. Rabbi Yitzchak also gave us an explanation. Rabbi Shmuel did not really explain in the Braita. So now says the Gemara. My tama. So we're about 8 lines down towards the end of the line. It says my tama. Again, on you'd given on bet. My tama de Rabbi Shmuel. What is the reason of Rabbi Shmuel? Again, Rabbi Shmuel who says that everything, whether it is chayav mitat beitin or chayav karet, could be bichlal malkot arba'in. My tama de Rabbi Shmuel dichtiv. We're going to learn out from the psukim. Im lo tishmor lasot. It's called Divrei Torah Azot. One pasuk says to us, right? The entire pasuk. This is in Dvarim Kafchet, pasuk Nun Chet. You should see it on the side of your Gemara. It says, "Im lo tishmor lasot." It's called Divrei Torah Azot. Haktuvim b'sefer hazeh lirat Hashem hanichbad v'hanora What will happen to you if you don't keep if you don't keep la'asot, to fulfill all of the words of this Torah? And then the very next pasuk says, "Uchtev v'hifla Hashem et makotcha." Right? It says Hashem will v'hifla. Difficult to translate that word, but we're going to see in a moment how the Gemara learns it. In other words, Hashem is going to bring upon you these Makkot, right? What are these Makkot? What exactly are we referring to? So says the Gemara, Hafla'a zo eini yodea ma'u. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this hafla'a is. Kshehu omer v'hipilo hashofet v'hikahu lefanav hevei omer hafla'a zo malkot. Right, from the fact that where the Torah says v'hipilo hashofet v'hikahu lefanav, where you have, this is the case. This is a pasuk we've seen previously. We actually discussed this in the first Perek. The full pasuk is regarding litigation, regarding two people who come together in Beit Din, and the Torah says v'haya im bin hakot harasha, that it's going to be, if you're going to execute the judgment, execute the Makkot against the Rasha, against the one who's been found guilty. V'pilo hashofet v'hikau lefanav kadei rishato b'mispar. This is where we're going to learn out about the idea of Makkot and about how many they are. So from there, from there we learn out that the word hipilo is similar to the word hafla'a, and just like over there it's referring to Makkot, so too over here it is referring to Makkot. So that's the principle that says imlo tishmor lasot. Two psukim. One says if you don't keep to it, if you don't fulfill the Torah, and then it's going to say hifla Hashem at makotcha, you're going to get these makot. That is the language. That is how Rabbi Ishmael learns. Right. So it says so v'pilo hashofet v'hikau lefanav hevei omer hafla zo malkot. So now we learn that hafla refers to malkot, malkoti. Uchtiv im lo tishmor lasot et kol, etc. The previous pasuk says that's the pasuk that says hifla, and we learn out that hifla refers to malkot. When would this apply? When would this hifla and these malkot apply? And that is based on the previous pasuk, which said im lo tishmor lasot et kol. It said if you don't keep what? It kol divrei Torah zot, all of the words of the Torah. So therefore, whatever it is that you haven't kept, it's going to apply for malkot. So the Gemara is going to ask, well, if that's the case, kol divrei Torah zot, then it should be it's kol divrei Torah hazot. It should be every single mitzvah, and we know that even Rabbi Ishmael is not going to say you would get malkot for every mitzvah. There are certain categories of lav for which you would not get malkot. Certainly for mitzvot asay, for positive mitzvot, which one is neglected to perform, which is also very serious, but one would not get malkot for that. So we'll see how the Gemara learns. So it now says, Ihachi. So if that's the case, right? If your limud is from the fact that it says im lo tishmor lasot et kol divrei haTorah zot, all the words of the Torah. So if so, well then chayavei seinami. Also, we should say the same thing. If you haven't done a positive mitzvah, you would get malkut as well. By the way, the positive mitzvah, generally speaking, we don't find punishments. We don't find punishments in the same way for not having fulfilled a positive mitzvah. The two exceptions, quite famous for two positive mitzvot for which one would get correct, are neglecting to have a brit milah and neglecting to eat the korban pesach. But other than that, generally speaking, there's there's a korban one would have to bring for not having done a mitzvah to say, but no malkot, etc. So says the Gemara, so it says im lo tishmor ktiv. No, we don't include mitzvot asay because the pasuk says im lo tishmor. Okay, Rabbi Avin amar Rabbi Eli, and we learn out based on what Rabbi Avin said in the name of Rabbi Eli. What did he say? Amar Rabbi Avin amar Rabbi Eli, kol makom shneimar hishamer pen va'al eino ela lo taseh. Right? There are certain words which have a negative connotation. The word hishamer, the word pen, and the word al.
all of these shamer are supposed to be careful to guard it, right? The root shamer lishmor is to guard. Pen, which we would probably translate in English as lest, and al means don't. So the word that is it comes up actually a couple of times in Chumash. You may remember, Rabbi Wein spoke about it a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, in Parshat Chayei Sarah, when Avram sends Eliezer to go and find a wife for Yitzchak, right? And Eliezer turns to Avram and he says, "Ulai lo tovei isha lelechet iti." He says, maybe the woman won't come with me, and asking what he should do. And the Gaon points out over there, the Vilna Gaon says that Eliezer should have said pen. He should have said, lest the woman won't come with me. Why does he say ulai? Pen always represents something negative. Ulai, meaning there was a certain amount of hopefulness here. So he says that yes, Eliezer over there was saying ulai because he was hoping the woman wouldn't come with him, because Eliezer had a daughter and he wanted his daughter to marry Yitzchak, not somebody else. So that's where it comes up. But also, I think the Vilna Gaon points out as well that when Yaakov has to go and get the brachot from Yitzchak, when Rivka tells him, go and take the zim and dress up and do the whole charade, and he says, Ulai yemusheni avi. There's an element there that Yaakov is actually saying, Ulai, maybe, I hope he will discover me. I don't want to do this. This goes against my nature. This is deception. This is trickery. I'm a man of truth. And it's not something, again, that is a whole fascinating discussion in and of itself. How could Yaakov, the man of truth, be engaged in deception? It's not our topic now. But there is an interpretation. The fact that he says ulai maybe means that he's hopeful that it should happen. But pen always means that it's negative. So we have words hishamer and pen and al. All of these carry a negative connotation. More than that, when it's said in the context of a command, when it's said in the context of a mitzvah, says Rabbi Avin Amar Rabbi Elai, he says shamer pen val eino ela lo taseh. These words all refer to lo taseh. These refer to a negative command, and therefore our pasuk which says im lo tishmor. Okay, so it's not exactly the word hishamer, but it's the same root, it's the same letters, the same understanding. So at least at this point, that is the answer. So the answer number one is, why do you not include mitzvot aseh? Because it says imlo tishmor, and tishmor is related to ishamer. That refers to negative mitzvot and not to aseh. It's not to a positive mitzvot. Okay. So Ihachi continues the Gemara with the kashas. We're not done yet. Ihachi lav she'en bo maaseh nami. Right, we spoke yesterday in our introduction, and it actually came up a little bit in the first Perek in the context of Eidim Zomamim. There are certain categories of negative mitzvot for which we know one would not get Makkot. One example is lav she'en bo maaseh, a passive, a prohibition for which there is no action. For example, somebody had chametz in their home from before Pesach. They didn't do anything actively to have their chametz, but they did not remove it. They did not destroy it. That's a prohibition, but there's no action that's been performed. That's a lav she'en bo maaseh. So a lav she'en bo maaseh, the general rule is one would not get karet for that. But why not? According to Rabbi Ishmael, you said it includes all a negative mitzvah. So answers the Gemara now. Lav she'en bo maaseh nami la asot ktiv, from the fact that it says la asot, right, which means to do. You have to do something. Okay. Next category. Next question. What about lav shenitak laaseh? Right, we mentioned this yesterday as well. You have a negative prohibition which is connected, which is attached to a positive prohibition, to a positive mitzvah. Somebody stole, right? That's a lav. They have a positive mitzvah of the yeshiva tagzela, to return that which they stole. That is an aseh. That is a lav shenitak laaseh. Why does one not get why does one not get Makkot for a lav shenitak laaseh? So it says lav shenitak laaseh nami. Answers the Gemara, dumya the lav the chasima. Now we learn all of it out from the lav of chasima, of muzzling an animal. One may not muzzle an ox while it is threshing, and we learn out from there, since that parsha, that mitzvah is written b'samuch, it's juxtaposed with the concept of Makkot. So therefore we learn that Makkot has to be done in such a way that applies to that mitzvah as well. So Rashi over here
Right, he points out. So first of all, just before, where he says "Lav she'ein bo maaseh nami," says "Alma amrinan b'kama duchte lav she'ein bo maaseh and lokin alav." Right, but with lav she'ein bo maaseh, why is that a kasha? That in fact is going to be a machloket. But he says we see in a number of places, and we'll come to this later. But we see in a number of places in the Gemara which says that for a lav she'ein bo maaseh you don't get malkot. And then he says dumya de lav de chasima shehu katuv etzel parshat malkot. Right, this mitzvah, this love of chasima, of threshing, of not muzzling an animal, and that is written next to the parasha of Malkot, and therefore we learn that this is somewhat of a binyan av for us for all the different issues or all the different prohibitions for which one would get Malkot. By the way, the question of muzzling, according to some Rishonim, this is where we learn out the issur of tsar ba'alei chayim. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, the prohibition in the Torah of tsar ba'alei chayim, of causing unnecessary harm to animals. According to most mafarshim, that is going to be an issur d'oraita. There are some who say it's d'rabanan, but the vast majority hold that it's d'oraita. Nowhere in the Torah does it say lo tetzaer ba'alei chayim. So where do we learn it from? So there are many different understandings. The Rambam writes this in Moreh Nevuchim. Has a very interesting source. He says it's learned out from Balak, from the fact that Balak hit the donkey and was told not to do that, that from there we learn out the mitzvah. But many Rishonim say that we do have individual mitzvot. And even though we normally don't say darshinan tamad dekra, even though we don't say we understand, we can darshan out the reason for a mitzvah, nonetheless, the fact that we have these mitzvot where you see one may not cause suffering to an animal, that may be a binyan av, that may teach us that there is a Torah prohibition to cause suffering to the animal, and one of them is learned out from here, from this love of chasima. In any event, the Gemara says, so we had three questions on Rabbi Yishmael. Question number one was, because we learned out, he said from this pasuk, which said, im lo tishmor lasot et kol divrei haTorah hazot. So question number one is, if it's called divrei haTorah hazot, why not mitzvot aseh? So we said it's not mitzvot aseh because it says tishmor. Okay, so we said it's only negative mitzvot. What about lav she'en bo maaseh? So we said lav she'en bo maaseh because it says la'asot. So it has to be something that you do. Okay, question number three was, what about lav shenitak le'aseh? Answer, lav shenitak le'aseh, you learn out from chasima, from muzzling. Just like chasima, there is not a lav shenitak le'aseh. So too, that would be the principle, that would be the way that we learn any similar prohibition. That's where one would get malkut. Now says the Gemara, now that we've said that answer, so we don't actually need the previous answers, which we said to the first two kashas. It says, hashtad atid lahachi, kulu nami dumya delav, the chasima. Now that you've said that answer, so we don't have to, now you'll come back and you'll say to me, why not mitzvat aseh? Well, mitzvat aseh is not like chasima. Why not lav she'en bo maaseh? Because that's not like chasima. Now you've given one good answer that answers all three. We don't need three separate answers either. Okay, so that is Rabbi Yishmael. Now we understand Rabbi Yishmael's source. We understand the challenges on him in terms of his opinion that one could get malkot for something which is chayv karet or something which is chayv mitat beitin. Now, what about we move on to Rabbi Akiva? Right, we're about halfway down the Amud. Rabbi Akiva, ma'itama. So, what is Rabbi Akiva's reasoning? Again, what did Rabbi Akiva say? He said that you could get malkot for something for which is chayv karet, but not for something which is chayv mitat beitin. Says Rashi over here. We'll come back to Rashi in a moment. So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Akiva ma'itama kedei rish ato. We had this limud in the first Perek as well, you may remember. But if the pasuk says kedei rish ato, that's that same pasuk we saw about Vayam binakot harasha v'pilo shofet v'ikau lefanav kedei rish ato b'mispar. That's where we learn how many lashes he's going to get as well. But what does it mean, rish ato? Mishum sha'a achat atam mechayvo v'i atam mechayvo mishum shtei reshuyot. Right? You would only and again, this pasuk is talking about malkot. So it says we would only execute that for one risha and not for two. You'd only get one set of punishments and not a second. So says Rashi, Rabbi Akiva, Kevan de'amar i'atam mechayvo mishum shtei reshuyot. Since Rabbi Akiva said you can only give him one punishment, not two. Chayavei kritot nami lo lilku.
This is the question the Gemara is about to ask. It says we should therefore say that, okay, we now understand why he won't get Malkut if he's chayav mitat beit din, but you should say the same thing if he's chayav karet. Because the penalty of karet is still on him, because he has not yet done tshuva. Okay, so says Rabbi Akiva, So first of all, before we come back to the question on Rabbi Akiva, why does Rabbi Yishmael not say that? Rabbi Yishmael also has that pasuk. Why does he not learn that way? It says Rabbi Yishmael, Hanemile mita umamon or malkot umamon, aval mita umalkot mita arichtahi. Okay, says Rabbi Yishmael, these words, it says, I agree with the principle. I agree with you, Rabbi Akiva, about the principle that you can be machayim for one rishah, not for shtei rishiyot. But what does it mean, shtei rishiyot? It means if you're giving two separate punishments, it means you're giving two different punishments. So if the case was, therefore, a mita and mamon, that you're talking about the death penalty, and a mandatory punishment, so for Shonot. Henry, do you have a question?
Yeah, when it says that he hasn't, Rabbi Akiva says he hasn't yet made tshuva, does one have to make a public tshuva? I mean, how would he know if somebody's made tshuva? As you said, perhaps momentarily in his heart, he could have done tshuva. How do we come to this? That his whole reasoning is based on the fact that he hasn't yet done tshuva.
Correct. So that's we're going to come back to that in a moment, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be public, right? We're right now not asking the question of how do we know, but we're asking the question of theoretically, is he chayav in these things? And the assumption is at this point he's chayav. So your question is, well, why don't we give him the benefit of the doubt, just like the Gemara in Kiddushin? Why don't we assume? So I guess the answer would be that in this case, it's not really giving him the benefit of the doubt. Meaning, if we can assume that a person has done tshuva in order to for their benefit or some reason like that. Over here, if we say we'll assume that he's done tshuva and therefore we're going to give him malkot, right? That's not really for his benefit in such a way, I suppose. But it strikes me as the type of question which the Achronim would ask, and I'll have to look up for you. I don't know. I don't know right now, but that would be interesting to see what the Mefarshim say about that particular question. But before we get there, so Rabbi Yishmael says, look, if we say you're chayav for one rishah, not shtei rishayot, so that makes sense if it's two separate things. For example, hanemile mita v'mamon. If it is, the death penalty and a mandatory penalty, those are two things which are completely separate, punishments, which you would not give both. Or malkot mamon. So too, if it's on the one hand lashes, which is physical punishment, and mamon, which is a mandatory punishment, fine. Aval mita malkot, says Rabbi Yishmael, where I disagree with Rabbi Akiva is to say that mita and malkot should be two separate things, but they're really both part of the same thing. He says mita arichtahi. He says essentially the malkot is going to begin the process of, it's going to lead to the person's death. Right now we know ordinarily, and I think we spoke about this previously, ordinarily the malkot are not there for a person to right, if a person is not chayav mita, then they are given malkot as much as they can handle. Person's meant to get 39 lashes, but the Beit Din does an evaluation, and they find that if he's going to get 39 lashes, he's going to die. Right? He can only handle 38, or he can only handle 30, or he can only handle 3, or whatever it is. That's as many as he gets. We saw in the previous Perek, you'll remember, we said, what happens if a person kills somebody in the case of a mitzvah? Would they go into the Miklat? And we discussed the case of the Shliach Beit Din, which there was a machloket rishonim over there. But according to one of the interpretations, the case of the Shliach Beit Din was who administered lashes, and the person died when he wasn't meant to. Okay, what happens? So there, that's a separate case. But yeah, he's saying when a person is going to be chayav mita anyway, and he's chayav malkot, so we begin with the malkot and we end up with the mita. Says Rabbi Yishmael, that's considered part of the same thing. That's considered a mita arichta. That's considered like one long death penalty, and therefore
you could give them both. Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Akiva says no. These are two separate things, and that would not be proper. It would not be sufficient. Rabbi Akiva. So that is why Rabbi Yishmael argues here with Rabbi Akiva. But then, as we've said, the Gemara asks the question. It says Rabbi Akiva, Iachi chayve kritot nami my amach imasu tshuva. Right? According to Rabbi Akiva, it still doesn't make sense because Rabbi Akiva says you can't get two punishments, and so therefore somebody is. That's why somebody is chayv mita could not be chayv malkut as well. But he says yachi chayvei kritot nami. Say the same thing for somebody who's chayv karet. He's getting two punishments. So you say my amount. What did you say? You gave the answer in the Baraita. You said imasu tshuva, that if they had done tshuva, then they would not get karet. He says nonetheless, nonetheless, now he has not yet done tshuva, and therefore he's getting two, and therefore he should be exempt from getting malkut at this point. So the answer is Amar Rabbi Abau beferush ripta Torah chayavei kritot lemalkut. Says Rabbi Abau, no, it's different there. We have an explicit limud in the Torah. We have an explicit pasuk that teaches us that somebody who's chayav karet is going to get malkut as well. It's going to be learned out from Gzera Shavad, Digamar le'einei mileinecha. We're going to see that there's a little bit would work according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael, who does not, Rabbi Yishmael would agree with that anyway. But we're going to see there's a little bit of discussion regarding this Gzera Shava, exactly how it works. But we will see that tomorrow. I think we'll stop here and carry on tomorrow.
Yes,
everyone, and have a great day as always.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.